The dress hung limply in Rosalie James' trembling hands, the ivory satin catching the late afternoon sun as tears threatened to spill onto her hollow cheeks. She had never imagined it would come to this standing outside Hargrove's General Store in Bisbee, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878, trying to sell her wedding dress for enough money to eat. Fine craftsmanship, she muttered to herself, fingers tracing the delicate beadwork her mother had painstakingly sewn. Surely worth at least $5. But even as the words left her lips, Rosalie knew that, in a frontier mining town like Bisbee, luxuries like wedding dresses held little value when compared to necessities like ammunition, tools, and food. She had arrived in town just 3 weeks prior, her savings nearly depleted after the long journey from Boston. The teaching position she had been promised at the newly established schoolhouse had evaporated upon her arrival, the mine's profits had unexpectedly dwindled, and the town council had voted to postpone the school's opening indefinitely. With no family to turn to and her pride preventing her from begging for charity, Rosalie had spent her last coins on a week's lodging at the boarding house. Now, with her stomach growling and her landlady's patience wearing thin, she had finally resorted to selling the one possession that still held any value, the dress she had intended to wear at her wedding to Edward, before he had succumbed to consumption last winter. "Excuse me, madam," a deep voice startled her from her thoughts. "Couldn't help but notice you standing out here for some time. Everything all right?" Rosalie turned to find herself facing a tall man atop a chestnut mare. Dust covered his worn denim pants and the sleeves of his chambray shirt were rolled to the elbows, revealing sun-bronzed forearms. A leather vest hung open over his broad chest, and his face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't particularly handsome in the conventional sense. His nose had clearly been broken at least once, and a thin scar ran along his jawline, but his eyes were kind. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied stiffly, attempting to fold the dress discreetly. The last thing she wanted was pity from a stranger. The man dismounted with surprising grace for someone of his size. "Name's Nathan Quinn," he said, removing his hat and revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Most folks call me Nate." "Rosalie James," she replied automatically, the proper Boston manners her mother had instilled rising to the surface despite her circumstances. "I'm merely conducting some business." His eyes flickered to the wedding dress in her hands, understanding dawning on his weathered features. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Quinn," Rosalie said sharply, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "It's not charity," he replied evenly. "I'd like to buy that dress." Rosalie blinked in surprise. "You want to buy a wedding dress?" A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I do." "Whatever for?" Nate Quinn studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes seeming to see right through her careful facade. "Save it," he said finally, "for our wedding." The audacity of his statement left Rosalie speechless. Before she could formulate a suitably outraged response, he continued, his voice dropping lower so that only she could hear. "Mrs. Hargrove mentioned a Boston lady looking for work. Said you were educated, proper, and desperate enough to be standing out here trying to sell your possessions rather than ask for help." He gestured toward the dress. "I've got a proposition that doesn't involve you parting with that. A job offer, nothing more." Relief and suspicion warred within her. "What sort of job, Mr. Quinn?" "I've got a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but it's growing. I also have a 6-year-old daughter who needs an education." He replaced his hat, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Room and board plus $2 a week to teach her reading, writing, arithmetic, and whatever else you city folks consider essential learning." Rosalie's mind raced. The offer seemed too good to be true, exactly the kind of opportunity that could lead a desperate woman into a compromising situation. And yet, there was something about Nathan Quinn that inspired trust despite her better judgment. "Your wife wouldn't object to having a strange woman living in your home?" she asked cautiously. A shadow passed over his face. "My wife passed 3 years ago. It's just me, my daughter Lily, and my ranch hand Jose." "I see." Rosalie clutched the wedding dress tighter, weighing her options. She had precisely 27 cents to her name and no prospects. And your comment about our wedding. For the first time, Nate Quinn looked slightly embarrassed. Just a poor attempt at humor, Miss James. I assure you my offer is strictly professional. Lily needs a teacher and you need employment. Nothing more complicated than that. The rumbling of her empty stomach made the decision for her. I accept your offer, Mr. Quinn, on a trial basis, 1 month to determine if the arrangement suits us both. Relief washed over his features. Fair enough. He gestured toward his horse. I've got some supplies to collect from Hargrove's, then we can head back to the ranch if you're ready to leave today. Rosalie nodded. I have few possessions. It won't take long to gather them from the boarding house. As Nathan Quinn strode toward the general store, Rosalie looked down at the wedding dress still clutched in her hands. Despite the man's assurances that his earlier comment had been merely a jest, something about the intensity in his eyes when he'd said, "Save it for our wedding," had stirred emotions she thought long buried alongside Edward's memory. Foolish girl, she chided herself, carefully folding the dress and placing it back in its tissue paper wrapping. He's offering you salvation, not courtship. Be grateful for that much. An hour later, Rosalie's meager belongings were secured behind Nate's saddle, and she was perched somewhat awkwardly in front of him on the mare as they made their way out of Bisbee. Her body tensed at the unfamiliar proximity to a man, especially one whose chest pressed against her back with every movement of the horse. Relax, Miss James, Nate said, his breath warm against her ear. Marigold here is the steadiest mount in the territory. You're in no danger of falling. It's not the horse that concerns me, Mr. Quinn, she replied primly. A deep chuckle rumbled through his chest. Fair enough, I promise to be a perfect gentleman. My mother would haunt me otherwise. The road out of Bisbee wound through rocky terrain, climbing steadily into the surrounding hills. As they crested a rise, Rosalie gasped at the vista that spread before them. The landscape was unlike anything she had seen in Massachusetts, harsh and unforgiving, yet possessing a raw beauty she couldn't deny. Towering saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the endless blue sky, while in the distance, mountains rose in purple majesty. It's beautiful, she murmured. Different from Boston, I imagine, Nate replied. Completely, Boston has its charms, but nothing so vast. The vastness takes some getting used to, he admitted. When I first came west after the war, I found it unsettling, all that open space with nowhere to hide. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. The freedom of it gets in your blood. You fought in the war, Rosalie asked, momentarily forgetting her discomfort. Union cavalry. Enlisted at 16, though I told them I was 18. Spent 3 years fighting, came home to Pennsylvania to find my parents both dead of typhoid and the family farm sold for taxes. His voice held no self-pity, merely stating facts. Decided there was nothing keeping me there, so I headed west. Rosalie was quiet for a moment, absorbing this glimpse into his past. I'm sorry about your parents. Long time ago now, he said simply. What about you? What brings a proper Boston lady to the Arizona territory? Not much of a story, I'm afraid, she replied. My father was a professor at Harvard who died 2 years ago. My mother followed him last year. I was engaged to be married, but Edward, my fiancé, contracted consumption and passed last winter. With no family left and limited options for supporting myself, I answered an advertisement for a teaching position in Bisbee. The school that never opened, Nate surmised. Exactly. By the time I discovered the position no longer existed, I had spent most of my savings on the journey. They lapsed into companionable silence as the horse picked its way down the other side of the hill. After nearly 2 hours of riding, they turned onto a narrow dirt track that wound through a grove of mesquite trees. Beyond the trees, a modest ranch house came into view, with several outbuildings scattered nearby. A corral held a handful of horses, and in the distance, Rosalie could make out a small herd of cattle grazing on the sparse vegetation. Welcome to the Lazy Q, Nate said as they approached. Not much to look at compared to Eastern standards, but it's home. Before Rosalie could respond, the front door of the house flew open, and a small figure came tearing across the yard. Papa, you're back." A little girl with blonde braids and a dirt-smudged face halted abruptly when she spotted Rosalie. Her eyes, the same vivid blue as her father's, widened with curiosity. "Who's that?" Nate dismounted and lifted Rosalie down with strong, steady hands. "Lily, this is Miss James. She's going to be your teacher. Miss James, this is my daughter, Lily." The girl scrutinized Rosalie with unabashed interest. "Are you a real teacher, with books and everything?" Despite her exhaustion, Rosalie couldn't help smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "I am indeed. And yes, I have several books with me." Lily bounced on her toes. "Can we start lessons right away? Papa's teaching is terrible. He doesn't even know who Queen Elizabeth was." "That's because we live in America, Wildcat," Nate said with fond exasperation, "where we don't much care about foreign royalty." "Miss James will care," Lily declared confidently. "She looks like she knows all about queens and such." Rosalie laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even her after weeks of worry and fear. "I do know about Queen Elizabeth, as it happens. But perhaps we should begin our lessons tomorrow after I've had a chance to settle in, I suppose," Lily conceded, though her disappointment was evident. "Can I show her to her room, Papa?" "Go on," Nate agreed, beginning to unload Rosalie's trunk. "I'll bring her things shortly." Lily seized Rosalie's hand and practically dragged her toward the house. "We fixed up the room special when Papa said he might find a teacher in town. It used to be Mama's sewing room, but Jose whitewashed the walls and I put flowers on the windowsill." The house was larger than it appeared from the outside, with a spacious common area that served as both parlor and dining room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple but sturdy furniture was arranged comfortably throughout. Everything was remarkably clean for a household with no female presence, though decidedly utilitarian in its decor. "Through here," Lily directed, leading Rosalie down a short hallway. "This is Papa's room, and mine is across from it, and yours is at the end." The room that would be hers was small but pleasant, with whitewashed walls as Lily had promised, and a window that looked out onto the eastern hills. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall, while a plain wooden dresser and washstand occupied another. A small writing desk and chair had been placed beneath the window. "Jose made the desk special," Lily informed her proudly, "for writing and teaching things." "It's lovely," Rosalie said sincerely, touched by the thoughtfulness of the preparation. "Thank you for welcoming me, Lily." The girl beamed. "I've been waiting forever for a teacher. Papa tries, but he's busy with the ranch, and Jose only knows numbers for cattle counting." Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced Nate's arrival with her trunk. He set it at the foot of the bed and straightened. "Will this suit you, Miss James?" "More than adequately, Mr. Quinn. Thank you. Supper's in about an hour. Nothing fancy Jose's cooking, but it'll fill your stomach." He hesitated at the doorway. "Lily, come help me with the evening chores and let Miss James rest a bit before dinner." "But Papa, no arguments, Wildcat. Miss James has had a long journey." As the door closed behind them, Rosalie sank onto the edge of the bed, her emotions a complex tangle. In the span of a few hours, she had gone from the brink of destitution to having shelter, employment, and purpose. The fact that it had come from a stranger with kind eyes and a child who desperately wanted to learn about Queen Elizabeth seemed almost providential. Her gaze fell on her trunk, where she knew the wedding dress lay carefully wrapped. Nathan Quinn's words echoed in her mind, "Save it for our wedding." Though he had dismissed it as a poor joke, the memory of those words stirred something within her that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. For now, she would focus on the task at hand, teaching a bright young girl and earning her keep. Whatever unusual circumstances had brought her to this place, Rosalie was determined to prove herself worthy of the unexpected opportunity. When she emerged for supper an hour later, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of beef stew and freshly baked biscuits. A Mexican man with salt and pepper hair stood at the stove, stirring a large pot. "Miss James," Nate said, rising from the table where he'd been seated with Lily. "This is Jose Ramirez. He's been with me since I first claimed this land." Jose wiped his hands on a cloth and nodded respectfully. "Welcome to Lazy Q, señorita. It is good to have a lady in the house again." "Thank you for preparing supper," Rosalie replied. "It smells wonderful." Sit here, Miss James. Lily patted the chair beside her enthusiastically. I'll show you how we say grace. The meal was simple but delicious, with plenty of hearty stew and biscuits still warm from the oven. Rosalie, who hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, had to restrain herself from devouring her portion with unseemly haste. Slow down, Lily, Nate admonished gently when his daughter reached for a third biscuit. Leave some for Miss James. Oh, I couldn't possibly eat another bite, Rosalie assured him. Everything was delicious, Jose grinned. Wait until tomorrow. On Sundays we have chili Colorado and frijoles, special recipe from my abuela. After supper, they gathered in the common room where Nate lit a lamp against the gathering darkness. Jose excused himself to check on a mare that was close to foaling, while Lily persuaded Rosalie to examine the few books the household possessed. Papa has Robinson Crusoe and Gulliver's Travels and a Bible, she explained, pulling volumes from a small shelf. And I have a primer that the traveling preacher gave me last year. Those are excellent books, Rosalie assured her. But I've brought several others, including some poetry and history texts that I think you'll enjoy. What's poetry? Lily asked, her forehead crinkling. Nate, who had been quietly smoking a pipe by the fireplace, chuckled. See what you're up against, Miss James. We're an uneducated lot out here. On the contrary, Rosalie countered, I'd say you're simply ready for new knowledge. Poetry, Lily, is a special way of using words to create beauty and express feelings. Would you like me to read some to you? The girl nodded eagerly, and Rosalie retrieved a slim volume of Wordsworth from her room. She read, I wandered lonely as a cloud aloud, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the verses. When she finished, she looked up to find both Lily and Nate watching her with rapt attention. That was beautiful, Lily breathed. Like music without singing. Exactly, Rosalie smiled. That's exactly what poetry is. Read another, Nate requested softly. She read 2 more poems before Lily's yawns became too frequent to ignore. Nate stood and scooped his daughter into his arms. Bedtime for you, Wildcat. Say good night to Miss James. Good night, Miss James, the child mumbled sleepily. Will you read more poetry tomorrow? Of course, Rosalie promised. Sleep well, Lily. After Nate had taken his daughter to bed, Rosalie remained in the common room, savoring the peaceful quiet of the ranch house. She had almost dozed off in her chair when Nate returned. She's asking for schoolbooks already, he said, keeping his voice low. You've made quite an impression. She's a bright child, Rosalie replied. Eager to learn, that makes teaching a joy rather than a task. Nate settled back into his chair by the fireplace. I've tried my best with her, but there's only so much I know to teach. I want more for her than this life. There's nothing wrong with this life, Rosalie said gently. He gave her a skeptical look. Says the Boston lady who probably had governesses and piano lessons and fancy dresses. I did, she acknowledged. And yet here I am, having sold almost everything I owned and nearly parting with my wedding dress for food. Perhaps my upbringing wasn't as advantageous as you might think. Nate studied her for a long moment. What happened to him? Your fiancé? Consumption, Rosalie replied, the familiar ache of loss rising in her chest. It was very quick. We were to be married in the spring, but by winter he was gone. I'm sorry. His voice held genuine empathy. It's not easy losing someone you love. No, it isn't, was it? Was it the same with your wife? Nate's gaze shifted to the fireplace, his expression growing distant. Different but no less final. Childbed fever. She lived long enough to name Lily but not to hold her. How terrible, Rosalie whispered, for both of you. It was a dark time, he admitted. If not for Lily needing me, I might have followed Margaret to the grave. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But that's ancient history now. We've made a life here, Lily and me. It's not refined or cultured, but it's honest. I think it's admirable, Rosalie said sincerely. Building something from nothing takes courage. A half smile curved his mouth. Is that what they teach in Boston finishing schools, to find the good in rough men living in rougher country? They teach us to recognize character, she countered. And to value substance over appearance. Their eyes met across the room, and for a breathless moment, something electric passed between them. Then Nate stood abruptly. It's late. You must be tired after your journey. We rise early here breakfast at sunrise. Of course, Rosalie replied, flustered by the sudden shift. Good night, Mr. Quinn. Nate, he corrected. If we're to live under the same roof, you might as well use my name. Then you must call me Rosalie. He nodded once, then turned toward his bedroom. Good night, Rosalie. Welcome to the Lazy Q. As she prepared for bed in her small room, Rosalie couldn't help replaying their conversation in her mind. There was something about Nathan Quinn that intrigued her, a depth beneath his rough exterior that hinted at a complex man with a capacity for both great strength and tenderness. The way he looked at his daughter spoke volumes about his character. But she reminded herself sternly that she was here as Lily's teacher, nothing more. Whatever fleeting connection she'd felt with Nate was likely born of gratitude and her own desperate circumstances. Romance was the last thing she should be contemplating, especially with a man who had employed her out of charity. With that firm resolution, she blew out her lamp and closed her eyes, expecting sleep to claim her quickly after the emotional turbulence of the day. Instead, she found herself listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Arizona night, the distant howl of coyotes, the soft nickering of horses from the corral, the whisper of wind through mesquite branches outside her window. And beneath it all, the echo of Nate Quinn's voice, "Save it for our wedding." The following weeks settled into a rhythm that surprised Rosalie with its comfortable familiarity. Each morning she rose before dawn, washed at the basin in her room, and dressed in one of her 3 serviceable dresses before joining the household for breakfast. Jose usually prepared the morning meal, hearty fare of eggs, beans, and tortillas that sustained them through the morning's work. After breakfast, Nate and Jose would head out to tend the cattle or work on ranch improvements, while Rosalie conducted lessons with Lily in the common room. The girl proved to be an exceptionally quick study, devouring knowledge with an enthusiasm that made teaching her a delight. By the end of the first week, she had mastered the basic multiplication tables and could recite several poems from memory. Afternoons were devoted to more practical education, Rosalie helping with household tasks while explaining the science behind bread rising or the geography of where various foodstuffs originated. Lily absorbed it all, asking insightful questions that occasionally left Rosalie scrambling for answers. "Why doesn't water fall off the earth if it's round?" the child asked one afternoon as they hung laundry on the line behind the house. "Because of something called gravity," Rosalie explained. "It's a force that pulls everything toward the center of the earth. Even people on the other side of the world, they don't fall off, exactly. Their gravity pulls them toward the earth just as ours does." Lily considered this with a frown. "Is gravity why Papa always says I'm the center of his world, because I pull him toward me?" The innocent question caught Rosalie off guard, a lump forming in her throat. "That's a different kind of gravity, Lily. The kind that exists between people who love each other very much. Like you and your fiancé who died," the girl asked with the direct curiosity of childhood. "Yes," Rosalie replied softly, "like that. Do you still feel his gravity pulling you?" The question was unexpectedly profound. "I think I always will in some ways, but it changes over time." Lily nodded sagely. "Like how Papa says he still loves Mama, but it doesn't hurt so much to think about her anymore." Before Rosalie could respond to this revelation, the sound of hoofbeats announced Nate's return. He rode into the yard, his shirt darkened with sweat from the day's labor, and dismounted with fluid grace. "How are my favorite ladies today?" he called, removing his hat and wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Papa," Lily abandoned the laundry basket and ran to him. "Miss James taught me about gravity and why Australia doesn't fall off the earth." Nate's eyes met Rosalie's over his daughter's head, a smile warming his features. "Is that so? Sounds like you're getting quite an education." "She's a remarkable student," Rosalie replied, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened under his gaze. "I've rarely seen such a quick mind." "Gets that from her mother," Nate said, ruffling Lily's hair. "Margaret could do sums in her head faster than most men could write them down." "Miss James can do that too," Lily declared loyally. "She added all the cattle numbers without even using paper." Nate raised an eyebrow. "Impressive." Though I hope you're not counting my cattle too closely, Miss James. A man likes to keep some mysteries." The teasing glint in his eye sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Your secrets are safe with me, Mr. Quinn, though Lily might not be so discreet." Their easy banter had become a highlight of Rosalie's days, these moments when Nate returned from his work, and they exchanged observations and mild jests before supper. It was nothing like the formal courtship rituals she had known in Boston, but there was something refreshingly honest about it that she found herself looking forward to each day. As the days stretched into weeks, Rosalie found herself increasingly integrated into the life of the ranch. She no longer felt like a guest or employee, but rather an essential part of the household. She had taken over much of the cooking, discovering to her surprise that she enjoyed the challenge of creating meals from the relatively limited ingredients available. Jose had taught her to make tortillas, and Nate had shown obvious appreciation for her efforts to incorporate some Eastern refinements into their frontier fare. "Never thought I'd taste Boston brown bread west of the Mississippi," he commented one evening after dinner. "Reminds me of meals I had during the war. Good memories, I hope?" Rosalie asked. "Some of the only good ones," he admitted. "There was a family in Maryland that took in several of us soldiers after a skirmish. The mother insisted on feeding us, properly said her sons were fighting somewhere, and she hoped someone was feeding them just as well." The conversation flowed easily between them these days, their initial awkwardness having given way to a comfortable familiarity. Rosalie found herself sharing stories of her life in Boston that she had never told anyone, not even Edward. In turn, Nate revealed more of his journey west and the struggles of establishing the ranch. "First 2 years were the hardest," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after Lily had gone to bed. "Barely survived that first winter, would have lost everything if not for Jose. He knew this land, taught me which plants were edible, how to find water in seemingly dry creek beds." "You've built something remarkable," Rosalie said, looking out at the ranch that had grown from nothing. "You should be proud." Nate's expression grew thoughtful. "I want it to be Lily's someday, a legacy for her, but I also want her to have choices I never had." "That's why your being here matters so much. I'm happy to teach her," Rosalie assured him. "She's a joy." "Not just to her," Nate said quietly. "To all of us. The ranch feels different since you arrived, better." The sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter treacherously. "I'm glad." Their eyes met in the gathering twilight, and Rosalie was struck by how different this man was from what she had initially thought. The rough cowboy exterior concealed a gentle soul, a devoted father, and a man of surprising depth. In Boston, she would never have given someone like Nathan Quinn a second glance. Here, she found herself thinking of him far too often. But despite the growing closeness between them, Nate maintained a respectful distance that sometimes frustrated her. He never made any reference to his initial joke about our wedding, and while he was unfailingly kind, he gave no indication that his feelings extended beyond friendship and appreciation for her work with Lily. "Papa says we're going to town tomorrow," Lily announced at breakfast one morning in Rosalie's 4th week at the ranch. "All of us, even you, Miss James." Rosalie looked to Nate for confirmation. "Is that right?" he nodded. "Need to pick up supplies, and Jose wants to send some money to his family in Sonora. Thought you might appreciate a change of scenery as well." "That would be lovely," she admitted. The prospect of returning to Bisbee filled her with a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had been so desperate the last time she was there, standing outside Hargrove's with her wedding dress in her hands. Now she would return as Lily Quinn's teacher, with money of her own to spend. The next morning, they set out just after dawn, Nate and Rosalie in the wagon with Lily between them, Jose following on horseback. The journey to town seemed much shorter and more pleasant than Rosalie remembered, filled with Lily's cheerful chatter and occasional comments from Nate about landmarks they passed or changes in the landscape since Rosalie's arrival. Bisbee was bustling when they arrived, the mining town's main street crowded with wagons, riders, and pedestrians going about their business. Rosalie noticed several curious glances directed their way as Nate helped her down from the wagon. Folks aren't used to seeing me in the company of a lady, he explained under his breath. Ignore them. Mr. Quinn. A woman's voice called out, and Rosalie turned to see Mrs. Hargrove from the general store approaching. Her shrewd eyes took in the sight of Rosalie standing beside Nate. And Miss James as well. What a surprise to see you still in the area. We thought perhaps you'd moved on after the school situation. Miss James has been teaching Lily, Nate replied before Rosalie could speak. She's staying at the ranch. The woman's eyebrows rose significantly. Is that so? How progressive of you, Mr. Quinn. The implication in her tone was unmistakable, and Rosalie felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Lily needed an education, Nate said firmly. Miss James needed employment. It's a perfectly respectable arrangement. Of course, Mrs. Hargrove replied, though her expression suggested otherwise. Well, good day to you both. She bustled away, clearly eager to share this juicy tidbit of gossip with others. I'm sorry about that, Nate muttered as they continued toward the general store. Small towns and their talk. It's all right, Rosalie assured him, though the encounter had unsettled her. She had been so comfortable at the ranch that she'd forgotten how their living arrangement might appear to others. In Boston, a single woman residing in a widower's home would be scandalous beyond redemption. Inside the store, Lily immediately gravitated toward a display of candy sticks, while Nate handed a list to Mr. Hargrove. Rosalie wandered the aisles, enjoying the simple pleasure of examining goods that had once been commonplace in her life: fabric, ribbons, imported tea, and stationery. She was admiring a bolt of blue calico when she became aware of whispered conversations nearby. Two women were speaking in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally darting in her direction. Living out there with him and that Mexican, not even a proper chaperone. The child, of course, makes it seem respectable, but we all know. Selling her wedding dress one day, moving in with a rancher the next. The word stung more than Rosalie wanted to admit. She had done nothing improper, yet these strangers were judging her based on appearances alone. A large hand suddenly came to rest at the small of her back, and she turned to find Nate standing beside her, his expression hard as he glared at the whispering women. Found something you like? He asked, his voice deliberately loud enough to be heard. Pick out whatever you want for a new dress. My treat as a bonus for Lily's progress. The women fell silent, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. That's very generous but unnecessary, Rosalie replied. I insist, Nate said firmly, his hand warm through the fabric of her dress. In fact, I think we should make it 2 lengths of fabric. Lily mentioned your birthday is coming up next month. It wasn't, but Rosalie recognized his attempt to provide cover for her reputation. Thank you, she said simply, selecting the blue calico and a length of cream muslin. As they completed their purchases and left the store, Rosalie was acutely aware of the stares following them. The easy companionship they had developed at the ranch felt strained now, constrained by the realities of their unusual situation. Don't pay them any mind, Nate said quietly as they loaded the supplies into the wagon. People will talk no matter what we do. It's different for me, Rosalie replied, keeping her voice low to prevent Lily from overhearing. A man's reputation is rarely damaged by such gossip. A woman's is destroyed by it, Nate's jaw tightened. Your reputation is beyond reproach as far as I'm concerned. That's kind, but Mr. Quinn, a voice interrupted their conversation. A well-dressed man approached, his expensive suit marking him as someone of importance in the small town. Arthur Wellington, president of the Bisbee Mining Association. A word, if I may, Nate nodded, though he looked reluctant to leave Rosalie's side. Of course, Miss James, would you mind watching Lily for a moment? As the men stepped away for their conversation, Rosalie distracted Lily by helping her unwrap the candy stick Nate had purchased for her. From the corner of her eye, she could see Nate and Mr. Wellington engaged in serious conversation, with occasional glances in her direction. When Nate returned, his expression was unreadable. Ready to head home, is everything all right? Rosalie asked as they climbed into the wagon. Fine, he replied tersely. Just business. The ride back to the ranch was considerably less jovial than the journey to town had been. Nate was preoccupied, responding to Lily's chatter with distracted murmurs while seemingly lost in thought. Even Jose, who rode alongside them for part of the way, noticed the change, shooting questioning glances at Rosalie that she could only answer with a helpless shrug. It wasn't until after supper, when Lily had gone to bed and Jose had retired to his quarters in one of the outbuildings, that Nate finally broke his silence. "Wellington offered to reopen the school," he said abruptly as they sat in the common room, "with you as the teacher." Rosalie's head snapped up from the mending she had been working on. "What? The mine's profits have improved. The town council voted to fund the school again." Nate stared into the fire, avoiding her gaze. "He offered you the position room at the boarding house included starting next month." A complicated mix of emotions flooded through Rosalie. The teaching position she had originally come to Bisbee for was suddenly available again. It would provide her with independence and respectability, free from the gossip that their current arrangement had generated. And yet, "I see," she said carefully, "and what did you tell him?" "That the decision was yours to make." Nate's voice was deliberately neutral. "It's a good opportunity, better pay than what I can offer, and no one to whisper about your reputation. And Lily, who would teach her if I went?" Nate shrugged. "She could attend the town school, I suppose. Make the ride-in with Jose each day. It's not ideal, but we managed before you came." The thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Lily and Jose and Nate, created an unexpected ache in Rosalie's chest. In just a month, this place had begun to feel like home in a way Boston never had after her parents' deaths. "Do you want me to go?" she asked softly. Nate's eyes finally met hers, a complexity of emotions swimming in their blue depths. "What I want doesn't matter." "This is about what's best for you." "That's not an answer." He stood abruptly and crossed to the window, staring out into the darkness. "No, I don't want you to go. Lily would be devastated. The house would feel empty without you." "And you?" Rosalie pressed, her heart pounding. "Would you miss me too?" The silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. When Nate finally turned back to her, his expression was raw with vulnerability. "More than I have any right to," he admitted, "but I won't hold you here out of selfishness. You came west for a teaching position, not to be a rancher's housekeeper." "That's not what I am, and you know it," Rosalie replied, rising to her feet. "I'm Lily's teacher, yes, but I'm also part of this home now. At least I thought I was." "You are," Nate said quickly. "More than you know. These past weeks have been, I never expected." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Rosalie took a step toward him, suddenly bold in a way she had never been in Boston. "Tell me what you never expected, Nate." His eyes darkened as she approached. "I never expected to feel this way again," he said hoarsely. "After Margaret died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. Then you appeared, standing outside Hargrove's with that wedding dress in your hands, looking both desperate and defiant all at once. And now?" She asked, another step bringing her closer to him. "Now I find myself thinking impossible thoughts." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Selfish thoughts about keeping you here, making you forget about the man you were going to marry, building a life together." The confession stole Rosalie's breath away. "That's why you said it, isn't it? About saving my dress for our wedding. It wasn't just a joke." "It was impulsive," Nate admitted. "Inappropriate, but something about you called to something in me, even in that first moment." They stood inches apart now, the tension between them almost unbearable. Rosalie could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating rapidly at the base of his throat. "Ask me again," she whispered. Confusion flickered across his features. "Ask you what? About the dress?" "Ask me to save it." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a hope so intense it transformed his entire face. Slowly, deliberately, he took her hands in his. "Save it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For our wedding. Not tomorrow or next week, but someday when you're ready." "When you're sure." Rosalie felt tears prickle behind her eyes. "I think I'm already sure," she confessed. "These weeks at the ranch, they've shown me what kind of man you are. How you treat your daughter, Jose, the land, even your animals. I've seen your integrity, your kindness, your strength." Nate's thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "What about Edward, the man you were going to marry?" "I will always love Edward," Rosalie said honestly. "He was my first love and nothing can change that, but my heart didn't die with him as much as I thought it might have. It was just waiting. For you, I think." The words had barely left her lips when Nate closed the remaining distance between them, one hand releasing hers to cup her cheek tenderly. "May I?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for permission. In answer, Rosalie rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as months of loneliness and weeks of growing feelings converged in this single moment of connection. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as her hands found their way to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you're not taking the school position?" A laugh bubbled up from Rosalie's chest. "No, I'm not taking it. My place is here with Lily, with you." Relief washed over his features. "Thank God." "I'm not sure what I would have done if you'd left." "You would have survived," she said, smoothing a hand over his cheek. "You're very good at that, but now neither of us has to just survive anymore. We can live instead." Nate's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the Arizona hills, warm, hopeful, and full of promise. "I'm going to court you properly," he declared. "No more whispers in town about impropriety. We'll do this right." "And what does right entail in Arizona territory?" Rosalie asked with amusement. "For starters, we'll tell Lily in the morning," he replied. "Though I suspect she's been matchmaking all along. Then I'll speak to Reverend Collins about posting the banns next time he passes through." "Banns?" Rosalie's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're already thinking of marriage." Nate's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking of it since the moment I saw you with that wedding dress, but we'll wait as long as you need. I want you to be certain, Rosalie, completely certain." The tenderness in his voice melted something inside her that had been frozen since Edward's death. "I don't need much time," she assured him. "This feels right in a way I can't explain, even though I'm just a rough rancher." His tone was light, but she could hear the underlying vulnerability. Rosalie reached up to touch his face again. "You are the most honorable, decent man I have ever known, Nathan Quinn. Any woman would be fortunate to be your wife." His eyes darkened at her words, and he pulled her close for another kiss, this one deeper and more passionate than the first. Rosalie lost herself in the sensation, marveling at how quickly life could change from desperation to hope, from loneliness to love. When they finally separated, both flushed and breathless, Nate reluctantly stepped back. We should probably say goodnight," he said regretfully. "Before I forget my promises about propriety." Rosalie nodded, though she was reluctant to break the spell of the moment. "Of course, good night, Nate." He caught her hand as she turned to go, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that sent shivers down her spine. "Dream of me," he whispered. "I will," she promised, knowing it was true. As she made her way to her room, Rosalie's steps felt lighter than they had in years. She closed her door and leaned against it, her fingers touching her lips where Nate's had been moments before. Then, moved by sudden impulse, she knelt beside her trunk and carefully removed the package containing her wedding dress. The ivory satin gleamed in the lamplight as she unwrapped it, the beadwork her mother had so lovingly sewn catching the golden glow. For the first time since Edward's death, she could look at the dress without feeling only pain. Now there was something else as well, a sense of possibility, of future joy. "Save it for our wedding," she whispered to herself, carefully refolding the delicate fabric. And this time, the words felt not like a desperate joke between strangers, but like a promise between two hearts finding their way to each other against all odds. Lily's reaction the next morning exceeded even Nate's predictions. When they told her over breakfast that they had decided to court with the intention of marriage, the little girl let out a whoop of joy so loud that Jose came running from the barn, thinking something was wrong. "I knew it," she crowed triumphantly. "I told Jose weeks ago that you looked at Miss James the same way Mr. Henderson looks at Mrs. Henderson in town, like she's made of sugar candy." Nate's ears reddened at this revelation. "I don't recall ever looking at anyone like they're made of candy," he protested. "Oh, you do," Jose confirmed with a wink at Rosalie. "Every time the señorita enters the room, like a starving man at a feast." Now it was Rosalie's turn to blush. "Well, regardless of who looked at whom like what, we've decided that we care for each other very much." "Does this mean you'll be my mama now?" Lily asked, her expression suddenly serious. Rosalie exchanged a glance with Nate before carefully responding. If your father and I do get married, I would be your stepmother, but I would never try to replace your real mother. She will always be a special part of your life and your heart. Lily considered this, her small forehead creased in thought. But I could still call you Mama sometimes. If I wanted to, tears welled in Rosalie's eyes. Of course, sweetheart, if that's what you want. Good, the child said decisively. Because I've been practicing saying it in my head and it sounds nice. Nate cleared his throat, visibly moved by the exchange. Right, well, that's settled then. Jose, you might want to start planning how we'll expand the house. I'm thinking another bedroom or two might be needed eventually. Jose grinned broadly. See, patron, perhaps I will finally get to build that cradle I have been designing in my head since Lily outgrew hers. The casual reference to future children made Rosalie's heart skip a beat, but the thought was more exciting than frightening. A family of her own, something she had thought lost forever, when Edward died, was suddenly a real possibility again. True to his word, Nate began courting Rosalie properly. Though they continued to live under the same roof, he was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, never entering her room and limiting their private moments to the porch or common areas where Lily or Jose might appear at any time. When they rode into Bisbee together, he proudly introduced her as Miss James, my intended, making their relationship clear to even the most determined gossips. Reverend Collins, the circuit preacher who visited Bisbee every 6 weeks, seemed delighted when Nate approached him about posting the banns. About time you found happiness again, Quinn, the older man said heartily. The Lord never intended man to be alone, especially not a good man raising a daughter. With the Reverend's blessing, they set a wedding date for mid-October, when the worst of the summer heat would have passed. Rosalie wrote to her few remaining acquaintances in Boston, informing them of her engagement to a rancher of excellent character and prospects. The replies were predictably shocked. A proper Boston lady marrying a frontier cowboy seemed scandalous to Eastern sensibilities, but Rosalie found she cared little for their opinions now. As summer faded into early autumn, Nate and Jose worked tirelessly to expand the ranch house, adding a larger bedroom for the newlyweds and improving the kitchen facilities at Rosalie's request. The work brought a new energy to the ranch, with everyone contributing ideas and efforts toward creating their shared future. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Nate took Rosalie's hand in his. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small leather pouch. "It's not fancy like what you might have had in Boston, but—" He opened the pouch and tipped its contents into his palm, a simple gold band set with a small, perfect diamond that caught the fading sunlight. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep when the farm was sold. I've been carrying it since I left Pennsylvania, waiting for— well, for you, though I didn't know it then." Rosalie stared at the ring, overcome with emotion. "It's beautiful, Nate, perfect. You're sure?" he asked, a rare hint of insecurity in his voice. "I could save up, get you something grander from back east. I don't want anything else," she assured him, extending her left hand. "This means more because it was your mother's, because you've kept it safe all this time." Nate slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as though made for her. "3 more weeks," he murmured, bringing her hand to his lips. "Then I can finally call you my wife. It feels like forever," Rosalie admitted, his eyes darkened with desire. "It does, but we've waited this long. A few more weeks won't kill us. Are you certain about that?" She teased, leaning closer. "Because sometimes I think it might." Nate groaned and captured her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender yet passionate, controlled yet with an undercurrent of barely restrained desire that made Rosalie's heart race. "You're testing my resolve, woman," he muttered when they parted. "Good," she replied impishly. "A man should be thoroughly tested before marriage." His laughter echoed across the yard, drawing Lily from the house to investigate. "What's so funny?" she demanded. "Just grown-up talk," Nate assured her, pulling his daughter onto his lap. "Miss James and I were discussing how glad we are that you approve of our marriage." "Of course I approve," Lily said matter-of-factly. I told God to send us a nice lady who knows about queens and poetry, and he did. You should thank me, really. Rosalie and Nate exchanged amused glances over the child's head. Consider yourself thanked, Wildcat, Nate said, pressing a kiss to his daughter's forehead. Now, I believe it's someone's bedtime. As Nate took Lily inside to tuck her in, Rosalie remained on the porch, gazing out at the landscape that had become as dear to her as the man she was about to marry. The Arizona territory was nothing like the Boston she had known, with its harsh beauty and unforgiving climate. And yet, she had found more happiness here in a few short months than in all her years in Massachusetts. The sound of footsteps behind her announced Nate's return. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her against his chest as they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Do you ever miss Boston? He asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Rosalie considered the question seriously. I miss certain things, bookshops, concerts, the changing seasons, but I don't miss the life I had there. It feels distant now, like something I read about rather than lived. And this life, is it enough for you? She turned in his arms to face him. It's more than enough. It's everything I never knew I wanted until I found it. The conviction in her voice seemed to satisfy something in him. He nodded once, then took her hand. Come with me, I want to show you something. Curious, Rosalie allowed him to lead her across the yard to the barn. Inside, lanterns had already been lit, casting a warm glow over the familiar space. Nate guided her to the back corner, where something large stood covered by a canvas tarp. Jose and I have been working on this in secret, he explained, a boyish excitement in his expression, for after the wedding. With a flourish, he pulled away the tarp to reveal an exquisitely crafted rocking chair, the wood polished to a warm honey glow. Carved into the headrest was a pattern of wildflowers, the same varieties that grew on the hills surrounding the ranch. Oh, Nate, Rosalie breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It's beautiful. Every ranch wife needs a proper rocking chair, he said, watching her face intently, for quiet evenings, for nursing babies, for growing old together. The simple words painted a picture of their future that filled Rosalie's heart to overflowing. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love she felt. I can't wait to be your wife, she whispered against his lips. His arms tightened around her. 19 more days, he replied. But who's counting? You are, apparently, she teased. Every minute, he admitted without shame. Every second until I can call you Mrs. Quinn. On the morning of their wedding day, Rosalie woke to the sound of Lily's excited chattering outside her door and Jose's quieter tones urging patience. The ranch had been a flurry of activity for days as they prepared for the celebration. Neighbors from miles around had been invited, along with townspeople from Bisbee who had gradually warmed to the idea of their unlikely romance. Miss James, Lily called through the door. Are you awake? Papa says I can't come in until you say so, but Jose made special breakfast and the water's hot for your bath. I'm awake, Rosalie called back, unable to suppress a smile at the child's enthusiasm. Tell Jose thank you for breakfast. I'll be out shortly. And then we get to help you with your dress, Lily continued excitedly. Mrs. Henderson is coming early to do your hair, and Papa has to go stay with Mr. Alvarez until the ceremony because he's not supposed to see you. And Lily, Jose's voice interrupted. Let Miss James have some peace to prepare. Come help me with the flowers. As their footsteps retreated, Rosalie rose and crossed to the window. The October day was dawning clear and bright, with the promise of perfect weather for their outdoor ceremony. From her vantage point, she could see the preparations that had been underway for days. Benches arranged in rows facing an arch, Jose had constructed and decorated with desert wildflowers and ribbons. Tables set up for the feast that would follow the ceremony, even a cleared area for dancing afterward. Her gaze shifted to the trunk at the foot of her bed, where her wedding dress lay carefully wrapped. After much discussion, she and Nate had decided that she would indeed wear the dress she had nearly sold for food that fateful day in Bisbee. There was a beautiful symmetry to it, the dress that had indirectly brought them together now symbolizing their union. The hours passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Henderson, the blacksmith's wife from Bisbee, arrived to help with Rosalie's hair, twisting it into an elegant arrangement adorned with small white flowers from the garden. Lily, dressed in her best pinafore with a crown of flowers on her golden head, watched the proceedings with wide-eyed fascination. "You look like an angel," the child whispered when Rosalie finally stood ready in her wedding dress. "Papa is going to cry when he sees you. Do you think so?" Rosalie asked, suddenly nervous. "Definitely," Lily nodded sagely. "He cried when I recited that poem about daffodils for my birthday, and you're much prettier than a poem." The simple logic made Rosalie laugh, dispelling some of her tension. "Well, then I'd better be prepared with a handkerchief for him, hadn't I?" By mid-afternoon, the guests had gathered, and it was time. José appeared at Rosalie's door, resplendent in a clean white shirt and his best vest, his silver-streaked hair slicked back. "The patron is waiting, señorita," he said, offering his arm. "And if I may say, you are the most beautiful bride this old man has ever seen." "Thank you, José," Rosalie replied, blinking back tears, "for everything, for accepting me into your family." "It is I who should thank you," he responded seriously. "You have brought life back to this house and joy to my patron's heart. Now, shall we go make him the happiest man in Arizona territory?" With Lily scattering flower petals before them, José escorted Rosalie from the house toward the gathered assembly. The moment she appeared, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the guests. But Rosalie had eyes only for Nate, who stood beneath the flower-decked arch beside Reverend Collins. He was dressed in clothes she had never seen before, a new black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaven. But it was his expression that caught her heart, a look of such naked adoration and wonder that it took her breath away. As José had predicted, tears glistened in Nate's eyes when she reached him. "You're wearing it," he whispered, his gaze taking in the ivory satin dress with its delicate beadwork. "The dress. I saved it," she replied softly, "for our wedding, just like you asked." His hand trembled slightly as he took hers, and in that moment, Rosalie knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. Reverend Collins spoke eloquently about love rising from the ashes of loss, about finding hope in unexpected places. Nate's voice was steady as he recited his vows, promising to cherish and protect her all the days of his life. Rosalie's own voice wavered with emotion as she pledged herself to him in return. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Nate gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. His kiss was both reverent and passionate, drawing good-natured cheers from their assembled guests. "Mrs. Quinn," he murmured against her lips. "Mr. Quinn," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was feasting and dancing, music provided by neighbors with fiddles and guitars, and enough goodwill to fill the vast Arizona sky. Lily flitted among the guests like a butterfly, proudly introducing herself as Miss Lily Quinn, daughter of Nathan and Rosalie Quinn, the new name rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Nate found Rosalie in conversation with some of the women from town who had initially been so judgmental of their arrangement. "May I steal my wife for a dance?" he asked, the word wife clearly giving him particular pleasure. The women tittered and waved them away. Nate led Rosalie to the center of the dancing area, pulling her close as the musicians struck up a waltz. "Are you happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, his voice low in her ear. "Deliriously," she assured him. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." His hand at the small of her back drew her closer. "Do you remember what I said that first day, about saving your dress for our wedding?" "Of course," she smiled. "How could I forget? It was quite possibly the most outrageous thing anyone had ever said to me." "I meant it," he confessed. "Even then, some part of me knew you were meant to be mine, as if I'd been waiting for you without knowing it." The admission made her heart soar. "I think perhaps I was meant to come west, to find you. Even the school position falling through led me to that moment outside Hargrove's, which led me to you." "Divine providence," Nate suggested, only half joking. Perhaps, Rosalie agreed, or perhaps just two people who needed each other, finding one another against all odds. As darkness fell completely, the celebration began to wind down. Guests drifted away with final congratulations and good wishes. Lily, exhausted from the day's excitement, was whisked away to spend the night at a neighbor's ranch, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first evening as husband and wife. When the last guest had departed, Nate took Rosalie's hand and led her back to the house, their home, now truly shared. The main room had been transformed for their return, with fresh flowers on every surface and lanterns casting a warm, golden glow over everything. "José's doing," Nate explained, seeing her surprise. "He said a bride deserves beauty on her wedding night." "Remind me to thank him," Rosalie said softly, touched by the gesture. Nate's arms encircled her waist from behind, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. "Later," he murmured. Much later, with infinite care, he turned her to face him. His fingers traced the line of her jaw as if memorizing her features. "I love you, Rosalie Quinn, more than I have words to express." "Then show me," she whispered, her heart pounding with anticipation. His kiss was her answer, tender yet passionate, a promise of the night to come and all the nights that would follow in their life together. Later, much later, they lay tangled in the sheets of their marriage bed, Rosalie's head resting on Nate's chest as he stroked her unbound hair. The wedding dress hung carefully in the wardrobe, its purpose now fulfilled but its significance forever part of their story. "What are you thinking?" Nate asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That I'm grateful," she replied honestly, "for everything that led me here." Even the desperate moments. His arms tightened around her. "No more desperate moments," he promised. "Not as long as I draw breath. I believe you." And she did, with every fiber of her being. Outside their window, the vast Arizona sky spread like a canopy of stars above the ranch, their home, their future. Rosalie Quinn, once a desperate Boston lady selling her wedding dress for food, now found herself exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a cowboy who had seen her value when she'd forgotten it herself. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Forever. In the years that followed, the story of how Nathan Quinn had found his wife became something of a legend in Bisbee and the surrounding area. "Save it for our wedding," people would say with a knowing smile when discussing unlikely romances or happy coincidences. The phrase entered the local lexicon as shorthand for recognizing your destiny when it appeared before you. The lazy Q prospered under their joint stewardship. Rosalie's Eastern education and Nate's frontier knowledge proved a formidable combination in business matters. They expanded their cattle operation, planted orchards that thrived in the Arizona climate, and eventually opened a small school on their property for the children of neighboring ranches, with Rosalie as the teacher. Lily flourished under Rosalie's guidance, growing into a confident young woman who combined her father's practical nature with her stepmother's love of learning. And 16 months after their wedding, the Quinn family welcomed a son, Edward José Quinn, named for the two men whose absence had, in different ways, made their family possible. Two more children followed in subsequent years, a daughter, Margaret, and another son, William. The rocking chair Nate had crafted saw countless hours of use as Rosalie nursed babies, read stories, and simply watched the sunset from their expanded porch, her husband often at her side. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nate presented Rosalie with a leather-bound journal. Inside, he had pasted a newspaper clipping a small advertisement she had placed in the Bisbee Gazette a decade earlier. "Wedding dress for sale. Finest Boston craftsmanship. Inquire at Hargrove's General Store." Beneath it, in his steady hand, he had written, "To my beloved wife, who saved her dress and gave me her heart. All the gold in Arizona could not equal the wealth you have brought to my life. Forever yours, N." Rosalie traced the words with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the evidence of how far they had come from that desperate day outside Hargrove's. "Do you ever regret it?" Nate asked, watching her face closely. "Giving up Boston for this life?" Her answer was as true on their 10th anniversary as it had been on their first day. Never, she said firmly. This life, our life, is everything I never knew I wanted. You saw something in me that day that I couldn't see in myself. You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me far more, he countered, drawing her into his arms. A partner, a mother for Lily, more children than I dared dream of, joy I thought was lost to me forever. That night, as they lay together in the bedroom they had shared for a decade, Rosalie reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this place. The wedding dress that had once represented her lowest moment now hung preserved in a cedar chest, a testament to beginnings found in endings, to hope discovered in despair. "You're thinking too hard," Nate murmured sleepily beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Just counting my blessings," she replied, nestling closer to him. "Start with me," he suggested with the playful arrogance that still made her laugh after all these years. "Always," she promised, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "You're the first blessing and the last. The beginning of this life, and the reason it's worth living."